All right, I think we're going to get started today. Thank you to everyone for joining us for today's webinar, Caught in the Middle. We're going to talk about the issues faced by the sandwich generation, including the financial and emotional toll it can take, and provide tips for taking care of yourself and your loved ones. So we don't have to get too caught in the weeds during this webinar. We've sent everyone a planning worksheet via email. This includes some helpful details and information. In addition, we've set aside time at the end to answer your questions. Some of you submitted questions in advance when they registered. However, if a question comes to mind, you can send it to us through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address it at the end as well. First, let us start off by introducing ourselves.
Thanks, Lee. So my name is Tim Paradise. I'm a partner and wealth manager here at Crestwood. I'm going to be talking to you today as an advisor, but also with firsthand experience of what it's like to be in the sandwich generation. So in my household, I've got our 3 young children, as well as a great grandfather that lives with us, as well as my mother-in-law. So we've got 4 generations under one roof. So not only do I have experience both on the financial planning side, but also personally in dealing with being in the sandwich generation.
Thank you, Tim. I'm looking forward to you sharing a bit more of your background here. I'm Lee Hurd. I'm a partner and a portfolio manager at Crestwood Advisors. So we know being in the sandwich generation can be stressful as you do your best to help the people you love while juggling your own personal responsibilities too. We want you to be fully informed as you make these deeply personal decisions about how to help. So we want to hear from you, and we'll ask some polling questions throughout the presentation. But first, let's share a bit about Crestwood Advisors for those of you who are new to us.
So for those of you that are new to us, and welcome to everybody that has already been with us. Crestwood was founded in 2003 with offices in Boston, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Colorado, allowing us to serve clients both locally, nationally, and even internationally. Over our 22 years in business, we've been humbled and fortunate enough to be recognized as a top RIA in the industry by Worth Magazine, USA Today, Newsweek, and Forbes Shook. So we wouldn't be able to do that without all the work that we do with you and all the trust you provide with us.
Great. Thank you, Tim. First, let's get started by first defining exactly what sandwich generation is. Sandwich generation refers typically to people who are sandwiched between caring for older loved ones and supporting their own young children at home. Sometimes it's financially, sometimes it's physically, and often it's both, and both have their own emotional tolls. This sounds like you, and that you're supporting your children and helping your parents or other loved ones. You're not alone. 23% of US adults today are in the sandwich generation. This means they're generally in their 40s and 50s, which is often their peak earning years, and many have had to make lifestyle changes or sacrifice their own financial security to care for their aging loved ones.
I feel like that transition goes right to me, and the fact that that's a decision that we make in our family every single day. So Lee, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of like who the sandwich generation is. Maybe talk a little bit about how we got here, right? So I think first is families are having children later in life, which means that our parents are older while we're raising our children and launching them into adulthood. Second, life expectancy has increased over time. There's more than 2.7 million Americans that are 90 years or older. And then third, cost of living, right? So I don't know about you, but I know a lot of our clients have come to us and said, how do we help our children with rent, or how do we help them pay for a down payment for our home? Because housing has gone up astronomically, especially in the last 5 years. And because of that, a lot of children that are launching into adulthood are opting to stay at home and be with mom and dad rather than going out into the world.
Yeah,
So
very
we talked.
useful.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lee.
Go ahead. Nope, I thought we would sort of, as we kick off and lay the groundwork, maybe find out a little bit about who's with us today.
Yeah. So this is going to be our first polling question. So are you in the sandwich generation? Yes, I'm caught in the middle. Please help. No, I'm not there yet, but I can see it coming. No, I'm the parent of someone in the sandwich generation, hoping my child will be there for me. So let's see what the results have here. All right. So it looks like an overwhelming amount of people are either caught in the middle and they need some help, or they're not there yet, but they see it coming. So for those of you, you are in the right place. Our hope today is to have a conversation a little bit about what it means to prepare your child to launch, and then talk a little bit about protecting yourself, and also what it means to take care of the people that cared for you. So maybe, Lee, we should talk a little bit about what it means to prepare your child to launch. I know that's something you're personally dealing with, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yep, thank you, Tim. And thank you for everyone that submitted their answers. First, you might find this interesting. I kind of broke my heart a little bit, but I read recently that 90% of the time, the in-person time you spend with your children happens by the time they turn 18. So that means the guidance that you give them into early adulthood is critical, especially as your time together becomes less frequent and you don't want to bog it down with all these financial conversations with them. So first, let's start off with the basics, which will really inform everything else. Teaching your kids how to create and live within a budget. That's really critical, and it helps them sort of into their next phases of life. This is a really good skill that you can start building really early. Maybe it starts when they're young, choosing between toys and candies, and then they're older, they transition to food, clothing, and travel. But understanding how to build that budget will really help them live independently. Often, one of the easiest ways to start is by starting a Roth IRA savings account for them. If they have any earned income, you can contribute up to 7,000 of their earned income into a Roth, or up to how much they've earned. One opportunity you might consider, because we really know that it's really hard for them to take their hard-earned cash and put it away, is maybe if you can convince them to contribute a little to a Roth, you'll contribute and match that contribution, so they still have a little bit of fun money left over for them. Now, you're really never too young to think about this. Tim, I know you've done something really creative with your family as well. Maybe you could share that.
Yeah. So I won't take any credit for this. My wife was the creator of this, but she found a really great piggy bank online that automatically breaks up the money that our children get from chores or allowance into three buckets. The first bucket is the spend bucket. So 50% of the money that they get goes directly into the spend bucket. The second is the save bucket. 30% of what they get goes into the save bucket, and 20% goes into the last bucket, which is the gift bucket. And it's created some really interesting conversations and some really great habits. First and foremost, it gets them used to automating their savings right away, so the money goes right into those buckets. Second, what it does is on the spending side, they learn what it means to be able to spend their money in a guilt-free way without worrying about, like, what do I have other money saved up for the other things, for the things that may be bigger that I might want, that cost a little bit more money. The other thing was interesting on the save. This just happened the other day. They're dying to get a bank account. They keep asking, "Can I get a bank account? Can I get a bank account? I want to have a card. I want to put my money in there. I want to get interest on my money," which I have no idea where they figured out how to get interest on the money. But they were really, really interested in that, which was a really great conversation around banking and all those other things. But the other thing that was interesting, we watch a lot of Disney Plus, as you can imagine. They're 12, 10, and 8. And we've been going through all the Marvel movies from beginning to end. And they were just like really enjoying and talking a little bit about it. And it actually spurred a really good conversation of like, well, what would you do if you were an owner in Disney? Right? Well, how can I be an owner? I can't be an owner in Disney. Well, you can be a shareholder. You can actually own shares of Disney if you're really that passionate about it and really love what they do. It's Disney. iPads are certainly a thing for our children, and figuring out how to use those in an appropriate manner, but they love Apple products. So talking a lot about on the save side, what it means to invest and how to do that is something that's really cool. And then the gifting piece, oftentimes we'll walk out of the grocery store and there's somebody from the VFW or something that is asking for donations. And they ask, can I use some of my money in my gift bucket towards that? Which spurred another, again, really good conversation around gifting and all those other things. So that's something that my wife thought of, and I thought it's been a really, really good tool to start having those conversations, instilling a lot of those values in them early when they can appreciate it, and getting used to automation. But that's what we've done in our family. And Lee, I know you do something a little bit on the gifting side as well for you and your family, right?
Yes, I do. We do. Donor advised funds offer some really unique opportunities. You can actually take a portion of your your investments within the fund, and you can actually allocate it to your children or really anyone, and they can make the donation from that gift fund. So oftentimes when, they're getting a lot of gifts around the holidays, one night we'll set aside time and allocate to each of them, maybe it's $100 towards to that they have to make a charitable contribution from. So it gives them the opportunity to think about where they'd like their money to go and
Mm,
directing that money that way. So it really gets them, get started really early.
yeah.
So that's another way to think about giving. And I love those ideas of getting sort of those really early investors going. I'm sure many of the younger investors on this call or any of us have children may not be as familiar with Peter Lynch, but he had some of the best words. And one of his better lines was the best stock to buy might be the one you already own in your closet. So it doesn't have to be the best long-term investment, but anything you can do to get kids engaged and interested is really going to pay off in the long run.
And they have a lot of accounts now too, right? There's been so many changes, whether it's a Roth IRA for kids or an investment account for kids and all these other things. So you have different age. It used to be you couldn't have anything unless it was a custodial account, unless you were 18 years or older. But now there's so many different avenues that are out there that we can get kids used to investing and what does it mean to buy a stock and do all that. So there's some really cool tools and resources out there that have come along just in the last few years to getting kids used to investing and thinking long term about what they do with their money.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we sort of think about, younger and now they, a little bit of, sort of housekeeping as they turn 18 and start heading off to college, it's really important that you have the documents in place to protect them and assure that you can communicate with any healthcare providers. I'm sure like many of us are, making those calls for their doctor's appointments, doing all the follow-up, making sure things get done. But once they turn 18, you don't really have that same access. So your college might have some paperwork that gives you access to their healthcare while they're on campus if they need services there, but that only applies on campus. So make sure before they head off, to college or their next steps, once they turn 18, get a healthcare power of attorney, general power of attorney over them, and make sure they have just a will in place. It doesn't have to be fancy, but these are really important documents that will help you help them as they sort of transition.
It also helps with the conversation, right? So
Mhm.
if you're talking to them about getting those documents in order, that naturally will have the conversation. Well, do you guys have that, mom, dad? Like who
Yep.
is the healthcare? If you haven't had those conversations already, who would that be? And who is your power of attorney? Maybe if there's, 17, 18, it's probably not them yet, but you can talk a little bit about who the people are and then have the conversation of the responsibility, what it means to be a power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, because probably if you have children, those are going to be the people you're going to be thinking about as you're building out your documentation later on in life. And it's really good to start that conversation now and get them used to it. And then, have them be in that experience even for themselves as a way to talk about your situation later on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, reminds me that my oldest just turned 22 and I still have my parents taking over for the kids, which was put in place a really long time ago. So right around his 21st birthday, I had to tell him that, if anything happens to us, he's in charge now. So fortunately, he's out of college, but I don't think that's exactly the way he wants to kick things off.
Yeah.
So that brings me next to sort of college graduates. And, what do with college tuitions costing around $100,000 a year, it's hard to imagine, but sometimes people have 529 funds left over. And so it's, a good place to sort of consider what you can do with those balances first. And I know this is a consideration as people are funding them. If you end up in a good spot where you get grants or scholarships, you can take those funds out penalty free. You'll just have to pay taxes on the gain. So don't worry if your child ends up with, excess money. The other thing that you can do is you can now convert up to $7,000 a year for 5 years. So that's 35,000 total into a Roth IRA for them. So what a great gift to get them started with those excess 529 funds. Or you could change beneficiaries. Maybe you have one child that's going to go to graduate school, or maybe you just want to save it for a future grandchild. These are great assets that you can really be creative in thinking about planning for. Another sort of expense as you think about heading into the workforce, first time recent graduates, is healthcare. Big expense for all of us, and fortunately, you can keep them on your plan until they're age 26. So this is really something we recommend, for all of our clients where they're able to. If you're on a family plan already, it's probably not going to cost you any more, but it really does help them get started if they don't have to pay for healthcare yet. And if you're not working, but you'd still like to help, you could pay their health costs directly for a period of time. Just talk to us so we can help you determine like what the right amount is, and we can build that into your plan.
Yeah. The thing on the healthcare too, Leah, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, but preparing yourself. So, we talk to clients, and some of the things that they're most worried about is, can they retire because their kids are still 19, 20, 21, and they have the great health insurance? Like, what are they going to do if they retire? Who's going to have the health insurance on them? And what are the different resources? So one of the themes that we'll talk about a little bit is preparing yourself first and making sure you're taking care of yourself first before you take care of anybody else. But there are things out there that you can help fund, right, through potentially annual gifting, which I know you'll talk about,
Yep.
to be able to help them pay for their own health insurance on the exchange or other things. But it breaks my heart when I hear people say, I'm going to hold off on retiring, even though I totally could, because I'm worried about what is the health insurance my child will have if they don't have my health insurance. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. And actually, and on the other side, hearing sometimes kids just not taking care of themselves or not having surgeries that they need because they're worried about the healthcare costs. So, another thing that you can always do is pay directly to their healthcare costs and cover those things and it doesn't come out of your annual gifting amount.
Yeah.
So Tim alluded to that already. And one of the things you can do, if you know they're going to inherit a sizable amount of money, you can start annual gifting. Now, it doesn't mean you have to gift every year, but you can gift up to 19,000 a person, 38,000 a couple to each child. So that gives you a really good way to start helping them build a nest egg, and then you can see how they spend it. You can start having conversations about what they're doing with it, making sure they're saving, but helping guide those decisions along the way. So if you just start that over time, even if you did it for a year or two, you can be really clear about how much you're giving. It doesn't mean you have to do it forever, but it might be something that you choose to do to get them started.
Yeah. I had a good line from a client a little while ago, where by doing the annual gifting, they get to hear thank yous every single
Mhm.
year, as opposed to one that they may never hear because they're no longer with us. So that's I thought that was a really good
I
perspective
like
on
that.
that, as a way to help out their child when they may need it most, and hear and see and appreciate the benefits of the annual gifting rather than just a big gift where they're no longer here.
Yep, I think that's a great sentiment there. And
Yeah.
obviously, Tim alluded to it, it's really expensive to buy a house, and some of these startup costs are really sizable. And we realize 19,000 or 38,000 might not get them a down payment early enough to sort of get them out of the house if that's your end goal. So you can consider some things like larger gifts, like interfamily loans, and we can really help you there to determine, what you're able to do and build this into your plan. But these are loans that are subject to an applicable federal rate, AFR, and these rates are typically much lower than mortgage rates. Today, they're around 4 to 5%, and so you can use that to make a loan to your child, so they can use that to make a down payment, and then you could, consider sort of gifting the interest amount, so they don't have to pay that interest annually. That could be part of gifting, and that really can help them sort of set a foundation and sort of make some of these larger investments that we know are coming.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the amount of calls we got during COVID, especially where their child needs to buy a home, and there's multiple offers, and they can do the annual gifting, but how can they do more? There was a lot of those conversations we had, especially during COVID in the last few years. Really helpful.
Yeah. So I'm going to transition a little bit, and hopefully my kids aren't on here, but also sometimes you just have to say no, right? And so I know we struggle with all of this, but teaching kids to live within their means lays the foundation for that future financial independence. Yes, we can step in and help, but sometimes it's far more valuable to teach them to make smart choices, to help them
Yeah.
evaluate what their wants are, what their needs are. Maybe that's encouraging them to live at home for a year or two after college to save, or choosing a less expensive apartment to allow room in their budgets for savings or other priorities. Life's about choices. We all know this. And the earlier we help them build that muscle, the better off it'll be.
Yeah. I mean, even Warren Buffett dealt with this, right? So
Yeah.
he had the whole conversation pretty publicly around what is the right amount of money that my children should inherit, right? It shouldn't be the full Berkshire Hathaway estate. So, had a conversation of making sure that they were secure enough where they could build something, but they weren't reliant and weren't reliant on the wealth, and weren't going to do anything with their lives. So, it's kind of hard to say no, but there are things to build that muscle that you can do. Plus, the other thing is that you don't want to continue to say yes, and then now you're putting yourself in a position where now you can't afford to do things that you want to do, while you're taking care of your children or even
Yeah.
your caregiver. So I think the other message we would say, right, is making sure that anything that you're doing to help launch your child, you prepare ahead of time, right? And making sure you're focusing on yourself. right? Like,
Yep.
you know, in our family, we have that discussion, and it is part of our core family values to make sure we're taking care of our family. We see the investments and the dividends that are being paid by having our children live with their grandfather. So we're willing to maybe push off some other things or not go on vacations to be able to afford that. But I think what's really important as you're going through all this is making sure you're focused on yourself first. You'll
Yep.
hear that theme throughout the rest of this conversation, but you know, focusing on yourself first is to make sure that you know, you're not putting yourself or your loved ones in a bad situation because you've extended yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that we'll cover that in it, the meat of the sandwich shortly. But
Yeah.
first, let's recap. We covered a lot here. So start young. It's never too early to start young, preparing your children for a successful launch. Teach them to budget early. Maybe it starts, with candy and some toys early, and then it's rent and travel later. But the earlier you start building these skills and helping teach your kids how to make choices, the better. There are lots of creative ways to assist. Maybe if your child lives at home for a couple of years, maybe you charge them rent and just set aside that money and invest it for them, put it in a Roth or just give them a nest egg for when they move out. We're happy to help you with some ideas here if you're looking for them. And then, really, Tim sort of alluded to this, like prepare yourself by focusing on you. Be sure of what you can do for yourself so you're not putting your own financial security at risk.
We won't tell them you joined. We know you're here to help yourself out with these big questions. We won't tell them that you joined, but make sure you prepare yourself by focusing on yourself first, for sure. Which I think brings us to our next polling question, right, Lee?
Yep.
So the next question is, have you spoken with your parents about the support they will need from you? Yes, I have, and it went well. Great. I did, and it did not go well. I haven't, but I plan to, and I don't know how to bring it up. So let's see where everybody is. This is like fun, it's like Jeopardy. You get to see what the answers are. I don't
Need a
know. I
music.
don't, I don't know. Yeah, we definitely need the music. That's for sure. All right. So, it looks like we've got some barbells here. Well, a lot of people have, and it went well, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And then the second most have not, and they don't know how to bring it up, right? So that's a really good part of the conversation, and one that I think we want to make sure we cover in our next part of our conversation, which is how will you care for those who cared for you, right? So it doesn't always have to be your parents or your grandparents. It could be a friend, a neighbor, an aunt or uncle, a lot of people that care for us, and we want to make sure that we care for them. So I don't know, Lee, why don't we talk a little bit about what it means first to provide care, and what are the types of care that are available, right?
Right. I mean, I think we hear a lot about this. It can be really confusing. There are a lot of options and really, really expensive. And I think it's important, like there's been a lot of evolution over the years and some of these are, much more appealing than they may have been, 15, 20 years ago. So
Right.
yeah, let's talk and sort of lay that out so people can have a framework about what's available.
Yeah. So I think the first one is the one I'm doing, which is having people live with you, right? So, and that can be range in a lot of different ways and have a lot of different costs, right? So it could be that you have an extra room in your house and you move somebody into the first floor. It could mean that you have to do some renovations to your home to make it available. Or you have to look at homes that have additional dwelling units or, side entrances or things to that effect that would be able that you could benefit from them being in your home, that you could help them out, you could be there for them, and in turn they could be there for you. Now, the costs associated with that are quite wide, right? It's just providing a home and shelter and food, all the way to building an additional dwelling unit and permitting and doing all that stuff. So that can be a pretty wide range, but that is one option that people look at. I know for my wife and I, we enjoy it because not only do we get to see the benefit of our children and with our great grandchildren and grandchildren, but we also get the benefit, right? So my wife and I are both working in the workforce. So the fact that we have somebody home at all times for our children is a real great investment for us. We don't have to pay for childcare. We don't have other things. So there's always two sides of the coin to be thinking about when you're looking at what is the best thing for me and my family. So living with you is one. The next one is in-home care, right? And that can also range, right? You can get homemaker services. You can have somebody come in and make sure that they're doing their activities of daily living, which is making sure they're getting up and getting changed and eating and doing all those other things. You could have somebody come in and clean their house, right? making sure that they're still independent enough that they're in their own home, but they're having somebody kind of check in with them, make sure that they're okay and they're doing well. Those can range. You can have something as simple as having somebody come clean your house a couple times a week, all the way up to much more involved home health aides, people that are living with them pretty much 9 to 5. Those costs can be, again, $3,000 a month, all the way up to $92,000 a year, depending on the type of service you're looking at and what's right for you and your family. Um,
I would just,
yeah,
there are a lot of choices there,
yeah,
and the earlier you start those conversations, the better. I think oftentimes we wait until it's too late and we're making decisions on behalf of our family members and we don't really know what they want. So the
yeah.
earlier you start talking about it, tour facilities, start getting involved. It just helps you feel confident as you're making those next choices.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this too, I think later on is, at whatever you decide, right? Because the other thing to think about is assisted living and nursing home care, is making sure that we truly understand like what your caregiver is really afraid of. Are they
Yeah,
afraid of getting hurt and nobody being around?
yeah,
Are they afraid of just losing their independence, right? So when people think about assisted living, there can be some really great things out there. They can get some social aspects. They can have, people, they can do senior facilities where they're going on trips and doing all those really
yeah,
great things. So if they're worried about like independence, there could be something where they have a much more robust social life than they do, if they were just to be at home. I know my parents don't live with us. They live in a community and they loved it. They're in their 70s and they go on trips. They do chair yoga. They play Rummy Cube that I've never heard
yeah,
of before until we started playing with them, and it's amazing. So there's a lot of different options, and it's really good to have the conversation now. So you're addressing the fear
yeah,
rather than just assuming what they're worried about. And again, those costs can range. Assisted living could go from 30 grand to $95,000 a year. Nursing home care, I was shocked when I saw this the other day. We were working with a client in North Shore, that the cost of a senior living, a nursing home facility, private room was $197,000 a year. And that was
wow,
a 7% increase over last year, right? So these things can range, and depending on what level of care that you want, making sure that you understand what those things are. And there's in the worksheet, there's a lot of really great resources. There's a link to the website where I'm getting a lot of these source information called Genworth Cost of Care Survey. So preparing early,
yeah.
understanding what is the level of care that you want to be having, and making sure you understand the fear that your loved one has, whether it's loss of independence or they could fall and nobody's around, and addressing the level of care to that is going to be really helpful having that conversation.
Yeah, and really understanding the resources, if they're looking for that, assisted living and, is $200,000 a year something that's sustainable? And so maybe you have to prepare yourself and you want to help and having those conversations with siblings too, to make sure you're all on the same page because there can be some, varying financial resources there or ability to help. And that, we talked about documents for children. And it's also really important to understand what documents the other generation has in place, making sure that you have everything, from those healthcare proxies lined up. Maybe there's somebody, dealing with the financial side of it, power of attorney, all that information. Be sure that it's clear and everybody understands what their wishes are so that, it helps alleviate confusion and also resentment among family members.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we see that a lot, right, Lee? Like,
Yeah.
and trying to understand on the emotional side, I think one of the things what people are afraid to bring up the conversation, they don't know how to do it. Again, understanding, being
Hmm.
vulnerable and understanding what is it they're afraid of, but also having a clear conversation around who's going to do what and how within the family, right? So my brother and I, we've already had this conversation with our parents. He is the healthcare proxy. I am the power of attorney from a financial standpoint. And understanding he was going to come to me for my voice on the medical stuff, but he has the final vote, right? So
Yeah.
having clear and consistent conversations around, all right, Tim, he has the vote when it comes to everything the financial, although Mark has a voice, and vice versa. I
Yeah.
think that's really important because that's where we see a lot of the turmoil, right? Is, I don't know, I'm the sibling that is closer to mom and dad. So I get to make all the decisions for them, even though, you know, I'm the sibling that's 3 hours away is helping to support in a greater financial way. You know, having that conversation and what does it mean to be even Stevens on things, and how does that
Yeah.
all work out? You know, who has a voice and who has a vote is probably the easiest way to be thinking about it, so
Yeah.
that you can then communicate that to your loved ones, to your children, and all those other things.
No, that's really a good point, and I think, this is the next generation that's you want your family members to be close, and we see it so many times that families get really fractured around some of these financial and healthcare decisions. They're really stressful.
Yeah.
Um, I thought, I want to bring up, like, we are part of the gig economy, so there are a lot more resources around today than there ever were. Sure, there are consultants, there are elder care consultants that we can recommend to you if you want to help just identifying, what care is available, helping you go on tour and look at different facilities. There are also people that are available for bill pay. We can, put you in contact with some resources there. But also, with online bill pay, that might be the perfect thing that somebody that isn't living as close and wants to help out, they can maybe step in and take care of bill payment. For other people, families all over, there are scheduling apps that we also highlighted in the worksheet, that can help facilitate, prescriptions, doctor's appointments, healthcare wishes and goals. So everybody's sort of on the same page. Um, and there's come a long way with iPhones. You can, get an alert, get an Apple Watch, and it can tell you if somebody falls, which is, can be really helpful. And, Tim already talked about just the value of community to really extending and building quality of life there.
So you're saying, maybe I'm going to date myself again, you did it with Peter Lynch, but we've come a long way from the commercial of "help, I've fallen and I can't get up." So I think that's what I'm hearing you say, where
Yep.
your Apple Watch or your wearable or whatever it is that you have can kind of help with understanding, like, if somebody falls and they need help, or where there's actually had that actually happened with us, where my grandfather, my wife's grandfather, lives with us. He had knee surgery, and he had one of those things on there to see if to detect if he had fallen or not. And we were in the other side of the house, and we got the alert that he had fallen. And we came in, and sure enough, he tried to sit down on his chair and he missed it and he kind of fell, and it gave us an alert right away that we walked over and said, "Are you okay? How you doing?" Of course, he was way more embarrassed than he was hurt. He wasn't hurt at
Yep.
all, actually. But it's like, it was just such a really cool thing that we saw, that, like, oh, okay, they're not alone anymore, right? And it's great that we had those resources. And I think your point on the emotional support, I brought my parents in the senior center where they're at. Not only is there chair yoga and Rummy Cube and all these other things, but there's a lot of other support services to talk through different things. I know there's a lot of group support that talks about, like, dealing with
Yep.
your aging parents, or what does it mean to have all your documents in order. Some of the things they put together that I see my parents go to are really cool. So there's a lot of emotional support out there, not just your family, because sometimes you feel like you can't talk to them because they're not ready to hear it. But the senior centers, the people to go with their religious organizations, wherever it is, tap into any emotional support that you can tap into, to make sure that you are having a conversation without it being fear based.
Yeah, it's actually reminded me, my parent did just move into a 55 plus community. And when they were looking, they're well over 55, obviously, but when they were looking at the community, they met a gentleman who said that living in that community had extended his life by at least 10 years and really enhanced the quality of it. So there's really a lot to that, to being part of those communities.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate the conversation, Lee. Maybe it's a lot about my own therapy sessions. I talked a lot about my life here, but I really hope that some of these conversations are helping people that are dealing with this and dealing with the caregivers that are important to them. So to recap, right, what we talked a little bit about in this part of the conversation is, number one, the cost of care can really add up, right? Both emotionally and financially, right? So, understanding what you're looking to do, having the conversations both financially and emotionally, is really important. Plan ahead. You might find in that conversation your parent has a long-term care plan that they set up years ago, and that supports them for 6 years. So it's important to plan ahead and maybe find out that they've already done so. And lastly, there's a lot of resources and tools available that can help people out, making sure that they are in the right position to be there in case something bad would happen or get bad would happen, or also make sure that that their loved ones are in the right spot.
Yep, and many of those resources are available in the worksheet. And we
Yeah,
won't tell anyone if you don't have anyone at home, but you still want to take advantage of some of the meal prep services. Those are good for everyone. We
yeah,
have
yeah,
lots of recommendations
exactly.
there as well.
Well, actually, that's a good transition, Lee. Because I think we've talked a little bit about a sandwich. We talked about, launching your child into adulthood. We've talked a lot about the top part of the sandwich and taking care of your caregiver, but we all know the most important part of the sandwich is the middle, right? The meat and the cheese and everything else, which is we think of as taking care of yourself, right? So for those of you that are Crestwood clients, you've seen this in some way, shape, or form. This is our wealth roadmap, which covers all the different things that you would want to be thinking about financially. And for people that aren't with us already, this is something that we review with our clients on an ongoing basis to talk about the areas of financial planning. Going back to our conversation around, have you looked at your income and your expenses and make sure that you can afford that with the amount that you have saved up? And what are some things you can do for both your children as well as your parents? Lee, I know you deal with the investment management side of it all. Like, what are some of the things we can be doing there?
Yeah, well, that's really important because we want to make sure that their investments are appropriately structured. I think, life expectancies are a lot longer than they, ever used to be. And we want to help you be sure that you're appropriately invested to have your assets grow. I think maybe, generation ago, it was sort of get much more conservative as we hit retirement. And, we want to be sure the assets are available for you to grow, to grow with you to support your future expenses. And we can think creatively about creating different buckets. Maybe it's Roth investments that are really targeted for the next generation and be really aggressive there. So it's really not a one size fits all approach. It's really trying to think about what your goals are and appropriately constructing that portfolio to meet those goals.
Yeah, I know we've talked about, do you do a long-term care plan or do you set funds aside for
Yeah.
20 years from now to fund, to fund any long-term care needs you may have? So that's a good point. I mean, we talked a little bit about 529 accounts and moving them from the 529 to a Roth IRA over a number of years. Taxes play an important role in all this. How do you move money between generations? We talked about that. Estate planning, we've already talked about healthcare proxy, power of attorney, will, but there's different trusts that you can set up that make sense. We get a lot of questions around like Medicaid trusts and what do those look like and how does that work? Talking through that. And then, the last thing I'll say in the upper right-hand corner, the conversation we're having right now is a big part of what we do, which is family governance, right?
Yep.
Like having a conversation of like, what does your family look like? What are the important core values and beliefs that your family has? And how is that permeating through everything else that we talked about? And then how do we help you with family meetings? And how do we help you have the conversation with your children, have the conversation with your parents, to make sure you're doing it in an open and a safe way so that we're not creating all this turmoil later on, and putting ourselves in a bad situation.
Yeah, that's great. So really you can think of us as your wealth advisor, but also we're part therapist too. We're here to help you
Yeah.
guide those conversations as well. Does
I
that
feel
work?
like today's been one big therapy session for me, so I would agree with you. It's been great.
All right, so we've been talking for a while. We're going to switch over and have some questions that have come in, and we'll answer those. So let's see, we've had a few questions come in. Okay, Tim, so it's a good one. I think it's time for my parents to move to an assisted living facility, but it's a sensitive topic. Do you have any suggestions to how to talk to them about that?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit already, which is, one, I think is understanding the fear that they really have, right? If it's something that you think they might be afraid of that, like you're taking away their independence,
Yeah,
or they're afraid that you're not going to visit them, that you're not going to be there, you're not going to be around. That's something I think number one, you want to start with that, where,
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why I've got people living in my home is that one, they couldn't financially afford to go in a facility.
yeah,
But two, they were really worried about like what the quality of life was going to be if they went. They didn't want to talk about the social aspect. They didn't know about a lot of those other things. So I think number one is, being open and understanding like what is it that you are afraid of? What are the ways we can help you understand some of those concerns? And I think it's also being vulnerable, right? So how do you bring it up?
yeah,
I think one of the best ways to bring it up is being vulnerable yourself. I'm worried about you.
yeah,
I'm worried about where the care that you could be getting, or what's going on. with my grandparents, you've gotten in a couple fender benders. Should you be driving, and should we be in a spot where you can get, bus services, those sorts of things. So that's my thought on that, Lee. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah.
How do you bring up the
No,
conversation?
the one thing I'd also add is it's not linear for both parents. Sometimes one parent, one person in the couple will age at, a different pace, and one needs more care than the other. And that's really stressful on the healthier parent as well. And maybe like helping them feel like they're seen, and maybe starting the conversation there. Like, I see what you're going through. This must be really hard. Like, how can we help? Because really you're putting their health at risk too, if they're the primary caregiver for another spouse whose, health isn't as good. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that we talked about going all the way back to the conversation around what does care look like. A lot of times that's what happens is one spouse is taking care of the other spouse.
yeah.
Uh, and emotionally that's a big toll in going through all those other things. And then if that spouse were to pass away, now you've got this person in a big house and all these other things, and having those conversations and engaging them, both of them, and what it means and the type of care that they want now is really important.
Yeah, yeah. So another question along those lines, but sort of the other end of the sandwich.
Mhm.
What strategies do you recommend for balancing saving for our own retirement, but also helping your children financially?
Well, I think Lee, you're living that right now,
Yeah.
so maybe you can talk a little bit of that, and I'll give you our thoughts as far as how we handle this.
Yeah, I think it's a really good, it's a really good consideration. And I think we talked about like how do you create that financial independence? Like learning how to budget and live within a budget is really important. And maybe it's living at home for those first couple of years to help them save. But I also, this does create long-term stress for, adults that are looking to support their children because they need to focus on their own retirement and their own assets. So I think being really clear about, what your assets, you don't have to give numbers, but like what you can afford to give so you're not putting your own financial security at risk. Maybe it's saying, I'll give you this amount over a finite period of time, but you can't borrow to fund your retirement. You can borrow to fund education. You can live, when you're younger, you have more ability to work and save and sort of create your own financial independence. It becomes really hard as you get older. And, we want to really focus, our job is to focus on you. So if you need, sometimes it's tools or tricks or just have us be the bad person, we can get involved in having those conversations with your kids too.
Yeah. I think too, from our side and you said talked a little bit about this today, is like, what is your core family values, right? So, balancing saving for your retirement versus helping out your children or your grandparents or great grandparents. I think it all comes down to what's important to you. So it
Yeah.
was important to my wife and I that we gave both our children and our loved ones above the opportunity to be living with each other, and the great benefits and dividends we see come from that. That's something that we know going into it that we could probably save a bit more if we weren't doing that. Again, aside from the benefit of not having to pay for childcare and all that kind of stuff. So I think it all comes down to like what are the core values that drive you, and if you think that that investment of having your family around, if they're living with you, is really important, that's something that that's a decision that we made. But it's the same thing for assisted living or nursing home care or all these other things. Is like what is the life, and what are the values that you want to ensure in your financial plan?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of benefit for having, if you have the space and you have the ability to have your family live with you for that younger generation. Like what great you're role modeling, right? Great, like caring for your elders and caring for the people that cared for you. But you're also helping build those relationships. I'll just share, one story. I have a friend who cared for her father during his last years of life. They lived with him for 3 years, and then no sooner had he passed, and her father-in-law moved in, and they cared for him during those last years. And that was all through sort of the teenage years for her children. So they still have these really, really close relationships, but it actually informed her daughter's career choice. She's now in school for nursing. So there is a
Wow.
lot of benefit for sort of enriching the lives this way. So it might seem, hard and stressful, but these are really enriching choices
Yeah.
you can make.
Yeah.
All right, I have one more question here. Um, this is a good one. I wonder who's coming up with this one. Hopefully, it's not one of my children disguising
Hmm.
themselves. But my daughter is struggling to make ends meet while she launches her career in New York City because rent is so expensive. How can I factor in paying for half the rent for the next few years into my financial plan?
Um, I think we already talked about that a little bit in
Yeah,
our last Q&A. Is Well, one, going all the way back to, is this something where you think that you should be helping her out, right? Sometimes the struggle is real,
Yeah,
and it can be really helpful. So that's number one. Aside from the austere measures, I think it all again goes back to what's important to you and your family. So obviously paying half of her rent in New York City, which I can only imagine what that is going to take away from resources that you would have, to live and enjoy your life that you've worked so hard to build. So
yeah,
we would say, obviously, invest in yourself first. You're only going to be stronger for your children if you invest in yourself first. But if it's something that's really important to you, going back to those core values, it's something where you maybe have to decide you work a year or two longer, or take a trip less, or maybe that's just what you're doing because they're gonna be getting a bit of money when you pass away, and that's how you're going to be front loading some of that earlier in life. So there's a couple
yeah.
different ways you can think about it. It really all depends on what's most important to you and what your values would dictate.
Yeah, and throw in, you could give a little bit of a carrot and a stick with this one. If you're going to help them with the rent, maybe you sort of like they have to put some money aside in their 401k. So they are forced a little bit of savings. If you're using your savings to support them, maybe, this is about budgeting and teaching people to sort of manage within that budget, even just a little bit, putting it aside in the 401k. Just having that come with the support for the rent might help and make them understand that this isn't sort of a blank check that goes on forever that way.
Carrot and stick, love it.
All
Um,
right.
well, that was our last question, Lee. I've really enjoyed having the conversation with you today. I know this is like the accumulation of a lot of the conversations we have with our clients. So if this is something that resonated with you or something that you thought was important you want to talk more about, please reach out to your Crestwood team. If you're not working with us yet, there's a QR code there that will bring you to our website, or you've got the information there for our phone number and our email. Please reach out. These are the conversations, unfortunately, we have multiple times a week, month, year, and it might be the only time you're having this conversation. So please reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way that we can to make this as easy as possible for you.
All right. Thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
Lee.
All right. Bye.